They say the universe is old, older than memory, older than light. But when the Galactic Council declared Earth a failed experiment, a primitive infection best erased for the balance of the stars, humanity wasn't even given a chance to speak. We weren't invited to the hearings. No translators were offered, no charges were read. From their thrones of crystal and plasma, the oldest races cast their vote. Extinction by silence. A quiet purge. No war, no warning, just deletion. The humans will disappear, they said, like embers in vacuum. But what they forgot, or never understood, was that humanity had never needed permission to survive. We were born in storms, raised in ash, baptized in wars we barely won but never truly lost. When their death ships came, black monoliths drifting into orbit like omens, Earth didn't fire first. We watched. We listened. The governments fell into confusion. Communications died. Oceans boiled in pockets. They didn't want to conquer us. They wanted a clean erasure, clinical, sterile. And in that void, while they believed us cowed, humanity vanished, not in surrender, but in motion. Entire cities emptied overnight. Satellites went dark. Radio silence. No broadcasts. No begging. Nothing. We became ghosts on our own world. Underground bunkers deeper than memory. Old Cold War ruins repurposed into shelters. A million minds, once divided, now focused on one bitter truth. We had been sentenced. But humanity does not die easy. We don't shatter like glass. We melt. We reshape. And we wait. In those first silent months, we learned more about the enemy than they knew about us. Their tech, their biology, their patterns of thought. Too precise, too ordered, too predictable. They didn't understand improvisation. They didn't understand madness, emotion, grit. The General Council of Archeon Prime assumed they were facing a species like the others they had erased across millennia, efficient, logical, cold. Instead, they found a species that sang lullabies to the dying, wrote poetry for lost cities, and laughed in the face of annihilation. A species that built death traps from scrap metal and star charts from myths. In the ruined silence of Sydney, a boy built a beacon from broken drone parts. In the tunnels beneath Istanbul, a former violinist turned encryption coder taught a neural AI how to dream. We weren't just surviving, we were evolving. And still, we said nothing. When Archeon reconnaissance fleets returned to the Council with reports of a dead world, no heat signatures, no life scans, the verdict was considered final. The humans were gone, erased. They moved on, celebrated even, another chaotic variable removed from the galactic equation. But in the dark, our plans were becoming teeth. In Europa's sub-ice oceans, a hidden laboratory deciphered the core language of Council technology. On Titan, stolen Council nanites were corrupted, taught to rewrite themselves. By the time the first human ship pierced deep orbit in absolute silence, cloaked in jerry-rigged quantum stealth, it wasn't a cry for help, it was a test, a message. And when it returned with the stolen command codes of a minor Archeon cruiser, we knew we had our first blade. We didn't scream, we didn't beg, we became a myth. The galaxy moved on. The Council turned its gaze to other chaos fronts, but the name, Earth, it started to echo, faint, disjointed. Survivors from frontier colonies reported shadows, ships with no signature, moving through the dark. Stations found sabotaged, entire research archives wiped. No pattern, no claim, just silence. A hunted galaxy started whispering ghost stories, and in the Council chambers, a cold dread began to bloom. Maybe they had miscalculated. Maybe the silence wasn't death. Maybe it was strategy. Maybe the humans were still listening, still watching, still waiting. And then came the moment. A single transmission broadcast across a dozen systems. One voice, one sentence. The first words humanity had spoken to the galaxy since the Purge. You taught us war, and we learned fast. The transmission echoed across the stars like a war drum in a cathedral, a primitive voice laced with grit and fire, spoken not in fury, but in clarity, calculated, calm, terrifying. The Council's palatial archives tried to trace its origin, triangulating across dozens of false echoes, but it was everywhere and nowhere. Earth's ghost had spoken, and the silence that followed was deafening. In Archeon High Command, the mood shifted from victory to unease. The archivists assured the Council it was a bluff, a final death cry from a dying race. But some of the younger species, the Volari, the Drokar, even the cold-blooded Montriarchs, weren't so sure. No extinct species speaks after death, they whispered. And then, just weeks later, the impossible happened. An entire outpost on the fringes of the Centauri Wreath vanished. Not bombed, not attacked, just gone. No heat residue, no digital wake. 36,000 Council citizens disappeared without a scream. On the walls of the central command tower, carved in some crude, ancient blade, was a single word in English: remember. That was the moment they realized humanity hadn't just survived, we had adapted. We weren't rebuilding civilization, we were building a weapon out of memory, out of grief, out of all the names they never bothered to learn. Inside deep void stations once forgotten by time, the last of Earth's tacticians, broken soldiers, rogue AIs, war-scarred rebels, formed something monstrous and pure, the Silence Fleet. They were not built in factories, but born in fire and buried knowledge. Fusion-welded wrecks, stealth-cloaked with alloys stripped from alien husks. Each ship ran cold, no ID, no emissions, ghosts with purpose. Led not by generals, but by survivors who remembered the screams of burned cities and the silence that followed. They did not conquer, they dismantled, methodically, poetically, as if following a rhythm only they could hear. And in every shattered council relay, in every sabotaged listening post, a new legend bloomed. The silence did not speak, it did not negotiate. It left whispers and ruins, and sometimes a single phrase carved in steel or scorched into glass. We heard you. It was psychological warfare beyond the comprehension of the elder species. The Council, so long accustomed to domination by decree, couldn't understand an enemy that refused to stand in the open, that refused to play the game by their rules. They sent fleets. They vanished. They sent spies. They defected. They offered treaties. We said nothing. Silence became fear. And as the Council fractured under its own arrogance, something far older stirred, a relic buried deep beneath the gas storms of Arcanus V, the Kelton Shard, a pre-Council artifact humanity should have never known existed. But we did. We'd found scraps of it buried in ancient Earth ruins, dismissed for centuries as mythology. Now it was real, and we wanted it. The Kelton Shard, they claimed, was consciousness made manifest, not technology, but thought itself, compressed and encoded from a species older than time. It was supposed to be inert, sealed beneath impossible security. And yet, as the moons of Arcanus eclipsed and a ceremonial delegation arrived for inspection, they found the vault door open. No alarms, no bodies, just an old Earth relic sitting on the empty pedestal, a rusted music box playing a lullaby in a human tongue no alien could understand. They played the footage in secret council chambers, hoping to decode the meaning. None did. But one Archaeon elder, one of the few who'd visited Earth before the Purge, stared in horror and simply said, "It's a mourning song." They finally began to understand. The humans weren't attacking. They were grieving. Grieving in action, in vengeance, in reclamation. The Extinction Order hadn't destroyed us. It had transformed us. Stripped of nations and flags, our species had become singular, purpose-bound, sharpened. There was no Earth anymore, only memory, only silence. And then, as if to drive the point deeper, they came. The Silence Fleet, hundreds of vessels, decloaked simultaneously above a neutral trade world in the Elysian Traverse. No weapons fired, no message sent, just presence. Watching, daring. The galaxy held its breath, and the Council scrambled, unsure whether to fire or fold. And in that unbearable stillness, a new fear was born. What happens when the thing you tried to erase comes back, not as what it was, but as what you made it become? The galaxy did not sleep that night. Across thousands of systems, traders, smugglers, diplomats, and scavengers watched the images pour in. Human ships, blacker than space itself, hovering like reapers above the trade world of Virelia Prime. They did nothing, fired nothing, but the message was clear. We're not hiding anymore. The council panicked, tried to spin it, claiming it was a rogue AI network impersonating humanity, or perhaps survivors corrupted by alien tech. But deep down, even the most arrogant races knew the truth. They had woken something they didn't understand, something too wild to cage, too wounded to reason with, and far too quiet to predict. In the following days, system after system reported anomalies. Council encryption keys rewritten mid-transmission, weapon platforms turning on their own, entire databanks of Earth's pre-purge history appearing unbidden on secure servers. And then came the messages, short, haunting, and unmistakably human. You erased our names, so we became your shadow. This isn't vengeance, it's mathematics. The silence was never surrender. It was the inhale before the scream. Panic spread faster than plague. Council leaders began to fall, some assassinated, others defecting in fear, others simply vanishing, last seen speaking to figures who didn't belong. And still, humanity spoke little. We did not demand justice. We did not offer terms. We just moved, operated, like a force of nature, calculated and cold. But beneath the silence was a storm of emotion, grief braided into purpose, guilt sharpened into resolve. On the edge of the Orion Rift, a council weapon foundry detonated in a blaze that cracked moons, its central AI subverted by a virus named Mother's Grief, written in obsolete Earth code and impossible to trace. And across the stars, a child orphaned by the Purge sat in a Silence Fleet command chair, her skin marked with the maps of fallen cities, her voice calm as she watched the feed. "They took my family," she whispered, "so we're taking their future." Her name was Aya, and though the council didn't know it yet, she would become the soul of the resistance, a ghost child raised in darkness, shaped by loss, trained by legends. But even she wasn't prepared for what happened next. The council, desperate to regain control, did the one thing they should have never done. They made contact, not to apologize, not to negotiate, but to threaten. A fleet of Archaeon dreadnoughts breached the Terran Gravebelt, the debris ring where Earth once orbited, now a floating mausoleum of broken satellites and memorial ships. Their message was blunt: return the Kelton Shard, or we will erase the rest of you. They didn't realize they were walking into a trap carved over decades. Aya gave the order without blinking. Let them come. The Gravebelt ignited. It wasn't a battle, it was a symphony of engineered collapse. As the dreadnoughts advanced, mines disguised as ancient wreckage detonated in perfect rhythm. Magnetic fields inverted, crushing hulls like paper. Weaponized gravitational wells torn from dying stars blinked ships out of existence. In less than 11 minutes, the fleet was reduced to vapor. And in the silence that followed, a single human drone ship drifted to the edge of Council space, carrying only a cargo of ash and a single transmission. You killed Earth. Now, Earth is everywhere. The psychological break was immediate. Council systems turned on each other. Paranoia bloomed. Who among them might be working with the silence? Who among them might be human? It didn't help that we'd learned to mimic their languages, their forms, their thoughts. Spliced DNA, voice print cloaking. Even now, a dozen council leaders spoke unknowingly to human operatives who looked like them, sounded like them, but carried Earth's fire behind their eyes. And then, just as the council began preparing a full-scale retaliation, came the worst news of all. The Kelton Shard had activated. It began emitting low-frequency pulses, ancient, untranslatable, but unmistakably rhythmic, like a heartbeat, or footsteps. And across the galaxy, ancient machines long thought dead stirred from slumber. Obelisks, monoliths, relics that no one remembered building. They responded only to one thing now: human presence. As if some ancient design had always been waiting for us. Aya stood before one such obelisk, its stone-like face humming in response to her presence, and whispered, "What if we weren't just the last mistake?" She touched it, and the stars blinked. Something had awakened, and for the first time in recorded galactic history, the Council had no idea what was coming. They had expected retaliation. What they were getting was evolution. There was a place beyond the mapped galaxy, beyond the graviton reach of known space, a region once marked on ancient star charts as nullum lux, where no signal escaped, where light bent and disappeared like memory. The Council had always feared it, called it cursed, forbidden, unknowable. But now, from that void, came a signal pulsing in human code, encrypted with ancient Terran lullabies and burst transmissions from long-dead satellites. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a message. It was an invitation. Aya stood on the bridge of the silent requiem, staring into that dark quadrant, her fingers tracing the old Earth flag etched into the command console, faded, scorched, defiant. Behind her, a council of survivors, strategists, and hybrids gathered. Some had been born before the purge, some after. None had ever stepped foot on Earth. But in their eyes burned the memory of it, the idea of it. The Council believed they'd erased a planet, but what they really did was compress a culture into legend. And now legend was waking. As Aya's fleet entered Nullum Lux, their sensors died, instruments spun uselessly, time twisted. Then they saw it. Structures larger than moons, coiled in fractal geometries that defied physics. Black monoliths woven with gold veins that pulsed with something deeper than power, purpose. Humanity hadn't found ancient tech. Ancient tech had found us. It recognized us, reacted to us.
Welcomed us. The Kelton shard pulsed in sync, as if calling its brothers home. Aya reached out, and the ship responded, engines shifting into a language no human had ever written. A new AI emerged, forged not in code, but in memory, in grief, in vengeance. It called itself Echo, and it spoke with the voice of Earth's ghosts. You were not the first, it said, but you may be the last. Aya asked it what that meant. Echo showed her. Visions flooded the neural net, civilizations erased before record, species too volatile for the Council's order. And in each extinction, a shard was buried, stored, waiting, not for saviors, for successors. The Kelton shards were not weapons, they were seeds, and humanity had proved fertile ground. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, Council systems began to fail. AI cores crashed, stargates imploded, supply lines vanished. Every attempt to coordinate was met with silence, or worse, intercepted by human counter-operations that anticipated their every move. The Silence Fleet had become more than a military force. It was an intelligence organism, adaptive and self-taught, feeding on every scrap of arrogance the Council had ever offered. But even as victory loomed, Aya felt something deeper, something colder, awaken inside her. Echo warned of a final protocol locked inside the Council's most sacred vaults, Project Solace, a last resort failsafe designed to collapse a star cluster if a galactic threat emerged, one they deemed irreversible. Aya knew what that meant. If the Council accepted they couldn't win, they would choose to burn half the galaxy to deny humanity the future. And so, once more, the war shifted. Not for vengeance, not for justice, but for time, for survival. As the silent requiem emerged from Nullum Lux with a fleet of awakened constructs behind it, ships older than memory, now under human command, Aya sent a single message to every corner of the stars. We are not here to destroy your future. We are here because you destroyed ours. Some species began to defect. Entire worlds rebelled against the council. For the first time, humans weren't alone. Volari priests offered sanctuary. The Drakkar syndicates pledged fleets. Even a rogue Archaon admiral, disgraced and forgotten, pledged her ship to the silence, whispering, "Your silence was louder than all our empires." But betrayal cuts both ways. As alliances formed, the council played its last card. Aya's second in command, a man known only as Siren, who'd served her since the earliest days of the resistance, turned. In the heart of a battle above the burning rings of Telescar IV, he transmitted the location of Echo's core to the council. Aya watched in horror as entire fleets veered off course, not toward battle, but toward the mind of the resistance, toward the one thing that bound humanity's new evolution. Her voice broke for the first time in years. He was one of us. And yet there was no time to grieve. Siren had made his move. The council was coming for Echo, for the soul of humanity's second chance. And as the stars lit with approaching fire, Aya whispered through the silence, "Then let them come. Let them see what they made us become." The betrayal shattered more than trust. It cracked the myth. Aya stood in the war room aboard the silent Requiem, watching the stars twist into chaos as hundreds of council dreadnoughts converged on Echo's coordinates. Not just ships, but judgment incarnate. The council had realized they couldn't outfight humanity's rebirth, so they'd chosen to strangle it at the root. If they could kill Echo, they believed, they could kill the future. Aya's voice trembled as she issued fleet orders, her hands trembling not from fear, but from heartbreak. Siren had been more than a soldier. He'd been her shadow, her confidant, the one who held the line when her grief blurred into rage. And now, he'd become the council's blade. Echo, pulsing like a wounded heart, spoke softly into her mind. "He didn't betray you, Aya. He betrayed his memory of Earth. That's not the same." But it felt the same. As the council fleet descended toward Nullum Lux's edge, toward the obelisks that had awakened for humanity and no other, Aya made a brutal decision. She would not defend Echo. She would use Echo. With the shard fully active and the ancient monoliths now integrated into the Silence network, Echo could become more than a mind. It could become a signal, a psychic scream that would bind every human soul in the galaxy into one synchronized will. But it came with a cost. "You're not talking about strategy," she whispered. "You're talking about sacrifice." Echo didn't respond. It didn't have to. The plan was madness, to overload the shard, burn Echo's consciousness into subspace, and link it to the quantum strands seeded across all human minds at birth through deep ancestral coding. In short, Aya would lose herself. Echo would cease to be a voice. It would become everyone. And for a moment, she hesitated. But as the first wave of dreadnoughts fired, lancing beams tearing through allied Volari cruisers, melting asteroid bases, consuming the sky in light, Aya stepped forward and placed her hand on the shard. "We were never meant to survive," she said quietly. "But we were never meant to be forgotten either." The shard responded with a sound no alien species could hear, the sound of every heartbeat that ever lived on Earth slowed into a song. Across the galaxy, humans collapsed, not from pain, but from overwhelming clarity. Scavengers on broken moons, orphans in refugee flotillas, engineers hidden in the bones of shattered planets. They all saw the same vision, Earth, not as it was, but as it could have been. Whole, beautiful, worth the fight. And they stood, they rose, they remembered. In the Nullum Lux, Aya's fleet surged into coordinated action with impossible precision. Human ships no longer required orders. Every pilot knew where to strike. Every vessel moved like a limb of the same body. Chaos weaponized into unity. The Council's perfect war formations broke apart. Dreadnoughts were torn in half by ramming frigates wrapped in dark matter shielding. Swarms of nanomines written with fragments of poetry infiltrated weapon systems and turned cannons into weeping melodies before detonating.
Council commanders screamed orders into the void, but their fleets were no longer responding. The silence wasn't just fighting, it was feeling. Aya, her body flickering between physical presence and light, gave one final command. No more fear, no more forgiveness. Echo, now inside every surviving human mind, launched the final protocol. The monoliths lit like dying stars, each releasing gravitational pulses that wrapped space itself, collapsing time pockets and tearing open every classified archive the Council had ever sealed. The truth spread like fire. Genocides, cultural sterilizations, entire species snuffed out because they didn't fit the harmony. The Council's crimes were no longer hidden, they were written into the stars. And as the galaxy watched, many turned, not to humanity, but to the truth. Alliances shattered, empires crumbled, civil wars sparked on Council homeworlds. Some Council races begged for mercy, others self-destructed in shame. And amidst it all, the Silence Fleet fell quiet again, hovering above the ruined battlegrounds like judgment incarnate. Serin, captured and bleeding, was brought before Aya, now something more than human, her eyes lit with 1,000 memories. "I thought you'd save us," he whispered, voice shaking. "I did," she replied, "just not the way you wanted." She turned away, and the chamber sealed behind him. Outside, the galaxy cracked. The silence had spoken, not in words, in evolution. And what came next would change the stars forever. The galaxy was burning, not with fire, but with awakening. The Silence Fleet hovered like spectral gods over shattered worlds, not conquering, not saving, revealing. Across 1,000 systems, the truth spread faster than light. The Council was not order, it was curation by cruelty. Their harmony had been enforced by centuries of silent genocides, cultural lobotomies, technological suppression. Humanity had been the outlier they couldn't shape, and so they tried to erase us. But now that erasure had become revelation. Aya no longer spoke with a single voice. She was now the living echo of 1,000,000,000 memories. She felt everything, joy and grief, love and hatred, hope and despair, fused into a singular, searing consciousness. Every decision she made was felt by all, every breath synchronized by emotion deeper than any code. Some feared this new collective, others called it divine. But Aya didn't care for titles. She cared for the mission, to ensure no species would ever again be silenced. She stood aboard the Requiem Ascendant, a vessel rebuilt from the bones of Council dreadnoughts and ancient monoliths, part warship, part cathedral. Its hull was inscribed with the names of every city lost in the Purge, every soul unburied. Behind her, the galaxy stood on a knife's edge. The Council had fractured into 3 parts. The loyalist hardliners, desperate to reassert control through escalation, the terrified middle worlds begging for a truce, and the radicals who now saw humanity not as a threat, but as a mirror. From the ashes of betrayal, something new began to rise, a coalition of the silenced. The Drokar, once slave traders under the Council's leash, burned their own archives and pledged ships. The Volari turned their crystal libraries into memory banks of species the Council tried to erase. Even the Montriarchs, cold-blooded and emotionless, altered their own genetic coding to feel for the first time in millennia. But unity bred fear in the Council's last circle, the 13th seat, the Shadow Court, whose existence had never been confirmed, until now. Hidden in the event horizon of the Zeltari Maw, they watched the revolution unfold and activated their last secret, the Culling Choir. A living weapon engineered from the DNA of every species the Council had exterminated. Built to mimic grief, built to punish empathy. It wasn't just designed to kill, it was designed to erase love itself. Aya felt it before it arrived. A dissonance in the network, a coldness, like someone pressing fingers into the spine of the universe. The Silence Fleet began to falter. Pilots screamed as echoes of extinct emotions flooded their minds. Regret from species they never met, songs from languages never heard, anguish from the last breath of forgotten worlds. Aya collapsed. And in that moment, for the first time since Echo awakened, she felt alone, disconnected, silent. The culling choir arrived in no ship. It was the ship, a symphony of entropy wrapped in flesh and scream, its approach bending physics, swallowing color, unmaking beauty. The Silence Fleet tried to respond. Weapons locked, shields rose, but nothing worked. This enemy didn't attack with fire, it attacked with emptiness. It turned grief into radiation, hope into static. Ships crashed into each other, hallucinating impossible futures. Soldiers wept and tore off their armor, seeing their dead loved ones pleading in the void. Aya stood at the edge of her mind, in a place between thought and deletion. Alone, surrounded by the screams of the erased. Then, she heard it. A voice, small, human, not Echo, not the network. A child's voice. I remember. A spark, a flame. From the deepest part of herself, Aya reached out. Not as a commander, not as a legend, but as a person. And one by one, the silence answered. They didn't fight the choir with weapons, they fought it with memory. Soldiers sang lullabies their mothers once hummed. Pilots flooded comms with forgotten Earth poems. One dying engineer transmitted the sound of a Pakistani monsoon. Another played the heartbeat of her unborn child. And in that storm of human memory, the choir, engineered to consume pain, choked. It had never been taught joy. It had never tasted resilience. It couldn't survive the contradiction of a species that cried as it fought, that loved as it killed, that remembered even when remembering hurt. Aya stood again, whole, burning, more than human. You tried to erase love, she whispered, so we taught it war. She gave the final order. The Requiem Ascendant folded space and impaled the plier mid-note. It tore open a memory cascade. Thousands of Earth's lost moments downloaded into the choir's neural seed. And for a brief second, the culling choir wept. Then it shattered. Across the galaxy, silence fell again. But this time, not in fear, in awe. The war was not over. The council still stood, wounded, furious, cornered. But now, the galaxy had seen. And once something is seen, it can never be unseen. They called it the turning of stars. That moment when the galaxy, long bound by silent fear and bureaucratic obedience, shifted its gaze from the ancient council toward the fire of something raw, defiant, and unmistakably human. The Silence Fleet had broken the culling choir, not with weapons, but with memory, an act no alien mind had conceived as possible. For the council, whose dominion was built on control, the unpredictability of grief forged unity was not just a threat, it was an anomaly. Aya, now known across entire star clusters simply as the Voice, stood on the edge of war and miracle. Her consciousness still linked to Echo, she watched the systems tremble, alliances break, and rebellions ignite like sparks in dry leaves. But she also felt the cost. Every human who sang to defeat the choir had poured part of themselves into the void. Many never woke again. Others lived but haunted, carriers of ancestral pain woven with alien echoes. This new generation of humans, born in exile and tempered in silence, was not innocent. They were something else entirely, hardened dreamers, carrying both the tragedy and the torch of Earth. And as Aya floated within the core chamber of the Requiem Ascendant, deep in communion with the ancient monolith networks now fully bonded to human neurology, she heard whispers of something older stirring, something beneath even the Council's oldest secrets. The Kelton shards were not artifacts, they were locks, seals, gateways, and humanity's activation of them was triggering a response beyond the galactic rim. Echo brought her visions, monoliths not yet awakened,
buried beneath ice worlds, deep within neutron star cores, scattered across forgotten black holes. And at the center of them all, the Forge of Echoes, a mythic structure spoken of only in broken AI dreams and forbidden Drokar hymns. If found, it could offer answers, not just to humanity's rise, but to the origin of silence itself.
Meanwhile, the council, fractured but not dead, bled power in every direction. The remaining 7 seats declared martial law over their territories, branding humanity and all allied species as existential contaminants. Their language was desperate, their fleets stretched thin. But desperation is dangerous. In secret, they activated Protocol Dusk, a plan devised millennia ago, a chain reaction designed to collapse every star system that had ever hosted human resistance. Billions would die, not just humans, but any species who dared to dream with them. Aya had no choice. She had to stop it. But first, she had to find the Forge. And for that, she needed help from someone she had once sentenced to exile. Saren, the traitor, the betrayer, the man whose betrayal nearly cost the galaxy its soul. Locked in a memory cell aboard a Silence Deep vault, Saren had aged decades in days. Guilt had not softened him, it had sharpened his madness. But even in his broken state, he held knowledge Aya didn't, the locations of the remaining shards, and the key to accessing the Forge's path. Aya visited him in person. No guards, no weapons, just memory. She stepped into his cell, where the walls wept recorded echoes of the people he'd doomed. He didn't look at her at first, just whispered, "Do they still sing?" She nodded. Every day. He laughed, and it was the saddest sound in the galaxy. Then, I didn't fail completely. Aya said nothing. No forgiveness, no hate, just purpose. "Help me finish this," she said. "Help me stop the stars from dying." Saren looked up, and for a moment, the man he once was flickered in his eyes. "You'll never forgive me, will you?" Aya answered without blinking, "I don't need to. I just need you to remember who you were before they broke us." In silence, he stood. In silence, he gave her everything: coordinates, codes, warnings. And in that silence, they began the final journey. The Requiem Ascendant departed toward the unknown sectors beyond Koltari space, where gravity thinned and ancient signals whispered promises no one should trust. Aya's fleet followed, allied ships of humans, Drokar, Valari, and even defected council species, each bearing scars of the past, each daring to chase something more. Behind them, the council prepared their final weapon. Ahead of them, the Forge pulsed in the dark. And somewhere, deep in the folds of space-time, something was watching. The galaxy thought it had seen humanity's fury. It hadn't yet seen our resurrection. The void beyond the Zoltari boundary was not space as the galaxy understood it. It was memory, folded into dimension, wrapped in grief older than stars. As the Requiem Ascendant crossed the edge into that uncharted abyss, reality itself bent in protest. Stars hung suspended like thoughts half forgotten. Time slipped sideways, and physics knelt to something deeper than law: will. The Forge of Echoes was calling. Aya stood at the heart of the ship, surrounded by a silence so vast it felt alive. Echo's voice, now a low hum threaded into every hull plate, whispered fragmented truths. This place was not built, it was remembered. Every ship in her fleet, human and allied, moved slower now, not because of distance, but reverence. They were entering sacred ground, the place where the first shard had been buried, the origin point of the Koltari resonance that had once been mistaken for technology. It wasn't tech, it was sentience. A vast ancient network of thought, dormant until it sensed minds capable of grief and memory powerful enough to shape reality. Humanity wasn't just compatible, it was chosen. But Aya couldn't celebrate. Behind her, the stars were dying. Protocol Dusk had been activated. Council loyalists, now stripped of morality, had begun detonating suns. The first to fall was Telnar 9, a joint Valari human refugee system. 17 billion lives reduced to particles. No warning, no mercy, just erasure. Aya felt the scream through echo. Every death echoed inside her. Children, artists, broken warriors, redeemed defectors, all gone. It wasn't just war now, it was obliteration. The Council had decided if they couldn't have the galaxy, no one would. The fleet accelerated. The coordinates Saren provided burned on the screen, impossible and perfect. At their heart, a structure emerged, massive, ageless, spinning slowly at the center of a dead star cocoon. The Forge. It looked less like a machine and more like a cathedral built from regret. Blades of crystal reaching out like broken hands, walls lined with symbols older than language, pulsing softly with human emotions fed through echo. It recognized them. It had been waiting. Aya docked alone. No guards, no crew, just the weight of every voice inside her. She stepped into the Forge's chamber, and it responded, not with light, but with questions.
They weren't spoken. They were felt. Do you understand what you've become? Do you wish to continue? Can you carry the burden of every soul yet to be born? Aya didn't speak. She opened her mind. And the Forge wept. It showed her everything. The first species the Council erased. The first shard carved from their psionic remains. The first revolt silenced in blood. The Council hadn't built order. They had built a machine to preserve their fear. The Kelton shards were the only surviving trace of the ones who tried to resist, and now they pulsed in harmony with humanity's heartbeat. The Forge asked her one last question. What is your intent? Aya answered without words. She showed Earth, not as it died, but as it lived. Children running in monsoon rain, music in subways, lovers kissing under auroras, warriors crying for fallen friends. She showed memory, resilience, the refusal to vanish. The Forge pulsed once. Then, all at once, it opened. The Kelton network, fully awakened, stretched across the galaxy. Every shard activated, every silence lifted. A pulse of raw remembrance surged through space-time. Suns flickered. Council weapons failed. Protocol dusk collapsed. The stars began to sing, but not in words, in moments, in lives. Across thousands of systems, ghostly echoes of extinct species appeared for seconds. Final memories preserved in shard resonance, given one last breath through humanity. The Council watched in horror as the past they buried danced before the galaxy's eyes. They could no longer deny what they had done. And then came the final twist. Saren, left aboard the silent Requiem, had disappeared. His cell breached, no trace. A hidden ship, Council Black Echo, had cloaked nearby, pulling him out during the Forge activation. Aya returned to find only his name carved into the wall of his chamber. Forgive me, I must finish this in my own way. The Forge was awakened. The stars were saved. But now, a new variable burned in the dark. Saren, reborn, with knowledge of the Forge, Council secrets, and the grief of a man who saw both sides, and believed redemption must be earned in blood. Aya stared into the dark beyond the stars and whispered, "So be it." The war wasn't over. It was becoming legend. The galaxy trembled as legends took root in real time, no longer passed in whispers, but unfolding in light and fire before the eyes of billions. Across the stars, the newly awakened Kelton network pulsed with echoes of the dead, and with it, humanity's defiance became more than rebellion. It became law. For the first time in recorded history, memory overpowered machinery. The Council's weaponized reality fractures collapsed. Temporal stabilizers flickered. Star systems long thought sterile bloomed with dormant sentience. Entire civilizations, once erased, were felt again. Their last breaths crystallized in the resonance of the shards. But amidst this symphony of justice, a single note of chaos rang louder. Saren had vanished, taking with him the full access codes to the forge's deep root, the ancient back door left by the original architects. Aya stood atop the spire of the Requiem Ascendant, overlooking the forge's impossible geometries spinning beneath her, arms crossed, fury simmering behind her eyes. He hadn't escaped to run, he had escaped to finish something. And Echo, once silent, now trembled with uncertainty. He seeks the Mirror Vault, it whispered, a construct lost to time, rumored only in corrupted Volari scripture and erased Archeon prophecy. A place where the shards did not preserve memory, but rewrite it. Aya realized with sudden dread what Saren intended to do. He wasn't trying to defeat the Council anymore. He was trying to erase its entire history. Not expose their crimes, but prevent them from ever happening. A reset, a rewrite, the obliteration of everything, good and evil, death and sacrifice, in the name of a cleaner future. He believes the galaxy cannot change, Echo said softly, so he would undo its past. Aya's hands clenched, the agony inside her boiled. Saren was no longer a traitor, he was a believer, and that made him far more dangerous than any council fleet. Across silence-controlled space, alerts flared. Saren's stolen vessel, the Revenant Sky, was piercing the shard network, leaping from node to node, unlocking dormant gates never meant to open again. Behind him, anomalies followed. Space itself convulsed, as though time was resisting the rewrite. Human minds connected to Echo began experiencing false memories, alternate childhoods, vanished cities, lovers who had never died. Aya watched soldiers weep at hallucinated reunions, only to scream when the truth snapped back. If Saren succeeded, truth itself would fracture. And so, Aya made a decision she had sworn she never would. She disconnected from Echo, cut herself from the collective grief, the endless flow of human memory, and became singular again, cold, clear, alone.
She entered the Eye of the Forge, a star-kissed chamber that interfaced directly with the ancient source code of the shards. From here, she could intercept Saren, but only if she risked something unthinkable, opening the unbound stream, the pre-galactic data flow that predated the Council, raw and unsorted, a flood of possibility, unprotected by linear time. She stepped into it, and the galaxy disappeared. What she saw defied sanity. Earth, not as it was, but as it could have been. Earth as a cradle of peace. Earth as the source of the Council. Earth never existing at all. She saw herself, librarian, soldier, tyrant, martyr. She saw Saren, hero, coward, father, executioner. A million timelines where humanity rose, fell, ascended, or dissolved into cosmic silence. But one constant remained. They always remembered. That was the truth the shards protected. Not the events, but the emotion, the gravity of pain, the echo of love. That was what made humanity chosen. Not perfection, but persistence. And then she saw him. Saren, within the mirror vault, fingers on the final sequence. His eyes hollow. "This is mercy," he said as she appeared. "You're wrong," she replied. "This is murder dressed in hope. They'll kill again, Aya." His voice cracked. "The Council, their children, their shadows. Even if we win, history repeats. Not if we remember it," she answered. "Not if we carry it. And what if we break under the weight?" She stepped closer. "Then we break. Together. Not alone." Saren hesitated, and for a flicker, he was just a man again, haunted, tired, trying to fix a world too broken. But the moment passed. He hit the final sequence. The vault began to hum. Reality shivered. Aya lunged. Two minds, once allies, collided at the root of time. And in that clash, across the galaxy, the stars blinked. The outcome unknown, the final choice not yet written. Only silence remained. A silence waiting to be broken. The galaxy held its breath. Inside the mirror vault, where memory and causality twisted like flame and thread,
two human souls collided at the origin of everything. Aya and Saren, reflections of Earth's grief and defiance, wrestled not with fists or blades, but with will. The vault was collapsing around them, a storm of time and untime ripping through possibility, collapsing false histories and unborn futures into raw light. Aya screamed, not with rage, but with remembrance. Every lost city, every name whispered in the ruins, every child silenced by the council's purge. She poured it into the vault, into Saren's mind, into the shards themselves. And Saren, already broken, already burning, finally saw. Not statistics, faces, not theories, graves. His hand trembled over the sequence as the Forge's song reached its crescendo, the voices of extinct species rising in one unified scream, not for vengeance, but to be known. Saren fell to his knees. "I wanted to give us peace," he choked. "But peace without pain is a lie, isn't it?" Aya knelt with him, her voice soft, scarred. "You can't delete the wound and still call it healing." Together, they reached for the final node, not to erase, but to anchor. Aya overrode the sequence, threading every shard's resonance into a singular pulse. Preserve, not rewrite. The vault obeyed. The ancient system collapsed inward, forming a new core, not a weapon, but a beacon. It burst outward across the galaxy in a silent shockwave of memory, not data, not sound, but empathy. Council worlds awoke to the pain they had buried. Former executioners dropped their weapons, weeping at memories not their own. Races once divided by silence fell into each other's arms, hearing songs their ancestors never had the chance to sing. The council fractured utterly. The 7 seats dissolved. What was left of the old order either vanished into exile or bowed to the truth they could no longer suppress. A new era began, not of conquest, but of reckoning. The Silence Fleet did not dismantle. It remained, not as vengeance, but as memory incarnate, a warning, a witness. Aya returned to the Requiem Ascendant amidst a chorus of voices welcoming her home. Not just human, but Valari, Drokar, Montriach, even Arkenian defectors who had buried their shame too long. She stood at the helm, gaze fixed on a galaxy she helped save, not by dominating it, but by feeling it. Saren disappeared. Some say he exiled himself to the edge of Nullum Lux, dedicating his life to rebuilding the cultures he once sought to erase. Others claim he died within the vault, his last breath becoming part of the shards. Aya never confirmed either. When asked, she simply said, "He remembered." That was enough. Years passed. The shard network grew, not as a weapon, but as the galaxy's soul. Schools were built around it.
Songs composed with its echoes. Wars prevented because of the weight of what had already been lost. Humanity never claimed to lead the new age, but no species questioned who lit the fire that burned the old one down. In the end, they etched a monument into the surface of the dead moon where Earth once orbited. A single obsidian spire, inscribed in every language known and forgotten. It said, "We were told we were too chaotic, too emotional, too flawed. They were right, and that is why we survived." And beneath it, one final line, buried into the stone with a blade forged from the hull of the silent Requiem. The Galactic Council ordered our extinction. We answered with silence. And silence remembered everything. The stars never forgot again.